Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of the Citrix session. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I have with me Bill Sutton. Bill, how's it going?
Going well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited again to do this. You and I had plans to interview someone about a blog that they had written a couple months ago around access control, and that one's not going to happen today. But we figured we would take this time and do the podcast that we had talked about doing. I had been thinking about a lot doing, which is to kind of go through the history of the Citrix product and what the products are used to be called and what they're now called. And some of the way those things have evolved into services. So if you're good with that, let's jump into it.
I'm good with that. Looking forward to it.
Okay, so I'm catching Bill a little off guard here because that wasn't what we planned to talk about. However, I know he's got the history in the background to get us through this and help me tell the story. And I think some of you guys are going to be surprised at what Citrix has to offer as part of the product set these days. So. All right. Well, let's talk about the very beginning, Bill, and how this what is it? It was Ed Yakabuchi came up with this idea of session-based computing back when he was working at IBM down at Coral Gables, right?
That's right. Yep, he came up with that and formed his own outfit. You know, what originally they wanted to name it Citrix Systems, but I don't think the citrus industry was thrilled, so they changed the S to an X, and off they went.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of people don't realize it was called Citrix in the beginning. So I love telling this part of Citrix, and that is, a lot of people don't realize that what Ed basically did was he took what would go across from the network card across a cable to a monitor, and he put that on the network and delivered it to a software client that could then take that and re-render it onto the screen through that CPU and that GPU and then that cable and then onto the monitor screen. That was pretty revolutionary at the time.
It was absolutely revolutionary, and the initial codes were based on Microsoft, IBM OS2, and then eventually, of course, migrated when it became clear that DOS and Windows were going to be the standard. He ported it over to that, but the ICA protocol, that which makes the magic all possible, was developed by Citrix from the beginning and is something they still completely own.
And you just used an acronym. I like to try to say it. So ICA stands for?
Independent Computing Architecture.
And that ICA protocol is what came out of that. And then I guess I'll fast forward real quick to the very end, or not the end, but at least where we're at today. And that is right. HDX is kind of the new name for the HDX protocol. Is kind of the new name for ICA. So if you're talking to people and they're saying HDX and you're wondering why they're not saying ICA, that's why.
That's right.
So Bill, that first product that you can remember that came out of that development, what was that called?
Well, there were a couple of really, really early day ones, Multiview and WinView, or WinView Multiview. I may have that backwards. I wasn't around the industry then. But those were the initial products, and then they eventually became WinFrame, which was kind of the one that took off and really, took Citrix into the public markets and grew the company. And then, of course, there are been various names over the years: MetaFrame, MetaFrame Presentation Server, and so on.
And so all those products were really intended to take the application workload that was showing up on a screen and take it and send it across a network and let it get rendered on somebody else's screen remotely while centrally making that happen, right?
Absolutely, yeah. The data and the applications were in the data center, and the user could be, in theory, anywhere, and essentially all that was going across that wire was screenshots, mouse movements, and keystrokes. Of course, that's changed a lot since those days. But back then, you were talking about mostly leased lines, ISDN modems. So the network throughput was pretty slow compared to today. But the ICA protocol, being what it was, helped optimize that and made it a real workable solution for lots of customers and lots of companies.
So I think I was sitting beside a guy who helped me roll out MetaFrame 1.8, and he said, "Hey, do you want to make a desktop available?" And I didn't really understand why you would do that because I thought it was applications were all that really mattered. And he started explaining to me that in some cases users need the full desktop experience. In some cases, applications perform better with a full desktop experience, and that there was a use case for it. And he did something I thought was amazing at the time. He basically took Windows Explorer and put a switch on the end of it, and up popped the desktop. And from that day forward, I've known what desktop virtualization, presentation desktop virtualization is.
That's right. Yep. And of course, we know what that morphed into.
Well, yeah, and one of the things I like to try to explain to people all the time, there's a massive difference between machine virtualization, like server virtualization, and actual desktop virtualization, where not only in many cases are you virtualizing the desktop, the machine workload, but you're also delivering what would have been that network, that GPU output. You're putting that on the network, and all of a sudden you've got virtualization from two factors: a machine that's virtualized and the delivery of the display and the interaction with the display that's virtualized.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that evolved with the technology, obviously, and can make a huge difference. In today's world, these really beefy visual applications like SolidWorks and AutoCAD and Revit and many others, they're confined to very expensive and powerful workstations, but by virtualizing them and leveraging GPU technology in the data center, you can deliver those things over less bandwidth intensive networks and still get a very similar experience.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting and challenging things about that concept of virtualizing all those end user type things is the actual end user, right? Their workload, their workloads, their workflows, these crazy apps that they have that might be very low resolution, maybe high resolution. That really presents a challenge that something as dare I say, simple as machine virtualization doesn't have to ever try to tackle. And then you throw in, security and what we intended to do this podcast on today, and access control, and you're taking something that you may or may not want someone to be able to get a hold of, and you're making it available from any network in the world.
Absolutely. And by centralizing in the data center, you're in theory securing it better, because the four walls of the data center are a lot more secure than what's around that desktop. But again, all we're sending to that desktop is screenshots, mouse movements, and keystrokes.
Yep.
And we can make them a lot more secure than that, obviously through policy. But at the end of the day, we're delivering a workload centralized in the data center to an endpoint, and the endpoint doesn't really matter in the sense that it doesn't have to be Windows. There's a number of different options for that, and by limiting what you're delivering to that workstation and what that workstation has access to, you are giving a broader measure of security to the data that's in the data center.
Right. Yeah, you're making it accessible, but at the same time, you can really control who has access and what they can access real time, and use variables to determine that moment, where they're at and what they're doing and whether it's appropriate or not. And that's only going to get even more advanced when we start talking in a few minutes about doing it as a service.
Yes.
So, okay, so let's, we've gone from, WinFrame to MetaFrame. Now we're at the presentation server, which I happen to love the name, because, to me, that's the name that makes the most sense if you think about the hardest part of this whole equation. However, that wasn't the name that captured the mind share of the technology, enterprise technology solutions. That they needed virtualization concepts in the name. And so all of a sudden, with the acquisition of XenSource, here comes the name Xen, and so that landed us at XenApp, right?
That's right.
And so XenApp became the application and even server desktop technology. And then in parallel, the guys from VMware started beating the drum around this thing called virtual desktop infrastructure, which was a true client desktop that ran on top of a hypervisor, in their case, their hypervisor. And that led to the rise of what product?
That took to the rise of Citrix virtual apps and desktops on the Citrix side, but on the VMware side, obviously, it was called View, wasn't it?
It was, but I was actually sorry.
I guess I misunderstood you.
Well, yeah, I set you up and didn't do a good job. That led to the rise of an individual product called Xen Desktop.
Oh yeah,
that was just VDI, right? It wasn't this all-inclusive suite. It was just the VDI portion of what Citrix was doing.
That's correct. Yes, and it was based on the XenApp, the underlying architecture that existed for many years of what was presentation server and then XenApp. So it was based on the same core management concepts that those of us that use or have used XenApp 6.5 in prior products. It leveraged that same platform for delivering virtual desktops via a hypervisor.
But I don't know if that's the correct way to say it, right? Because it had its own. That was the rise of the IMA architecture, which was, kind of running in parallel to the FlexCat FMA. So FMA, right? That was the rise of FMA. Meanwhile, ICA was still going on in the presentation server world, and then
Right.
I guess 3 years into that, those two worlds collided, and everything became FMA.
That's true. You're right. When the Zen Desktop name, I was thinking more of the kind of the stopgap that occurred in the interim. So when VMware coined the phrase VDI, or virtual desktop infrastructure, Citrix answered that, had already been developing something along those lines, and folks had already kind of been using it. And that was the ability to leverage what was then the XenApp architecture, like you said, Andy, FMA, not FMA, the IMA, the independent management architecture, which was the old one. The original presentation server framework was called something different, and they leveraged that to allow customers to deliver virtual desktops hosted in a VMware cluster. And then when they went to a completely different architecture, because that really wouldn't scale well when you're talking about thousands or tens of thousands of virtual desktops, they moved to this FlexCast architecture. And that was the point at which they really named it Zen Desktop.
The other piece of that too, I would point out, and I didn't really realize this, and I heard somebody say it at the time, and it didn't really stick with me. But moving to the FMA, flexible management architecture, FlexCast architecture, was the precursor for being able to bring Citrix's traditional products, their on-prem products, into the cloud, either the control plane or just
Right.
into the cloud, which is where we're going to go here in a few minutes. But I did want to highlight just for a minute, though, that origins of the Zen Desktop product, the VDI product, that was a very, very cost-effective solution from Citrix that was separate from the IMA solution. And what that got us into seeing is that there's a world of, it got me to understand there was a world of Citrix use cases that were as simple as just a virtual desktop that didn't need all the other capabilities that many times are a nice to have and really very valuable. But at the same time, a simple VDI use case goes a long way. And as a quick example, I'll tell you, as a company, XenTegra has all the resources in the world to do all the fancy Citrix things we want to do, but more often than not, all we do is VDI desktops for our end users because that gives them a landing place, a workspace. I used the word workspace early in this, but a workspace that's simple for them, that they understand, that lets them get their job done. And that original Zen Desktop product still lives today, and it's still something that you can buy as part of your Citrix standalone stack or part of a bigger stack.
That's right. Yeah, the names have changed, but the core concepts are very similar or the same. And the architecture is the same until you start moving into the cloud. Then you're still leveraging FMA, but you're not managing it necessarily, at least not all of it. We'll talk about that in a few minutes.
Yeah, so let's talk about modern day Citrix products, the mainstream products, the virtual app and desktop related products, the ones that came out of that original WinView world, the ones that came out of the XenSource world, the ones that came out of the original Zen Desktop. So I guess the easy one to cover real quick, and honestly, I wasn't even planning on talking about this one, but now that we're into the conversation, the Zen server conversation, right? That's the XenSource acquisition, which gives customers a hypervisor from Citrix that can be very simple and cost effective, included with the product that allows them to have a platform to run their workloads on.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, they've changed the name of that to Citrix Hypervisor, which I might have stolen your thunder there, Andy. But that was the foundation for the renaming. It was a big deal back in 2007 because at that time, you really only had VMware as the predominant hypervisor in the market. And that's what everyone ran their virtual desktops on. And then Citrix comes in and acquires a company and folds it into the stack. And now you can get all of that in one place.
Well, the other player in that space, right, was Microsoft and Hyper-V. Yeah. I think Citrix didn't see that progressing fast enough to give people options, and so at the end of the day, you ended up with vSphere, ESXi. You had Hyper-V with System Center Virtual Machine Manager. You have Zen Server, which is, as you pointed out, Citrix Hypervisor today. And you still have workloads that aren't the actual cloud, like KVMs that do. And well, now you have Nutanix Acropolis, right?
Yeah.
So you have 4 or 5 players in that space, and they all can play a role. I think one of the nice things to highlight here around the Citrix product is when it's kept for the proper use case, which in this case would be Citrix desktop and app virtualization of the machine workloads. It is a very viable and, of course, cost-effective way to get Citrix workloads up and going.
Absolutely, it is. We have a number of customers that are using it and using it well and effectively. And it supports all the GPU stuff that we mentioned earlier as well.
Yeah, the integrations there, the GPU support's there. Now, admittedly, we also have customers that have very poorly performing Citrix Zen server environments, and more often than not, it's because it's not been the care and feeding wasn't there. It was stood up and assumed that it would just run forever, and like everything else, it needs to have some care and feeding.
Well, I know that we've run into folks running older VMware environments as well, so they'll still be running on 4.0 or 4.1 or something, and I'm wondering why the performance is poor or they're running on slow storage. There's so many factors to a performant desktop that you really need somebody that knows what they're doing to put it in place and to help with the care and feeding once you get it going to keep it running optimally.
Yep. Keep it simple. Get a little help as needed, and
right.
All right, so let's jump into what has become of WinView, WinFrame, MetaFrame, and the Zen Desktop, Zen App story. So let's just walk through the what I'll call the traditional products from Citrix, which are the on-prem products, which is kind of hard to say these days because there's nothing that says you can't take that on-prem product and put it into a cloud where you still host and run your own licenses, your own license server. And we'll start at the very bottom of that stack. And I love talking about this one. I know there's limited use cases, but the Citrix virtual desktop standard, which has the nice benefit of coming either as a concurrent license or a user/device license. And we've got a podcast coming up where we're going to get the licensing guys on to help us fully understand user device licensing. But that's the simple one, right? It does what?
It essentially just allows you to do, what it says, which is virtualize a desktop on your choice of hypervisor, right?
And specifically, it's the client desktop, right? So you can't connect to a server desktop. You're going to run your VDAs inside of a single user Windows 7, Windows 10 session, but it knocks out and checks that VDI box that, a ton of customers really. That's all they're looking for. Again, we as a company, that's all we use today. We're looking at workspace, we're looking at some other things, but getting people into their desktop is our number one goal, and that's a Windows 10 desktop.
Absolutely.
Now, I should point this out. This is what I call the inexpensive Citrix solution. And for a lot of people, that sounds odd to say because they think of Citrix as a premium product. And this is a premium product, but for just a very simple use case. And so, you can look at this product either in a CCU, concurrent model, or user device model. And I think something like list price is $200 a user for the CCU model. It's $100 a user for the user device model. But it's a great way to get into the world of Citrix and get the Citrix ball rolling, which then will hopefully lead into more use cases around application virtualization, or Azure or Amazon, AWS related use cases. But that's the easy one. It's simple and not a lot of people know about it.
No, they don't. You're right.
Okay, so as we move up that stack, we can move into the world of what's now called Citrix Virtual Apps, which is the replacement for XenApp. And what this is going to allow you to do is connect to either a published or a seamless app. I can't believe we've gone this far without saying seamless app, but an application that appears to be running local that's really executing and being presented from a server OS, multi-user server OS on the back end.
Yeah, and this is kind of a throwback to the original use case, going back many years, and that is the ability to virtualize, like you said, Andy, to virtualize the app itself. The app's running on in the data center, and then the user is accessing that app, and it's like you said, seamless. And what that means is it looks like just any other app on your desktop. You can minimize, maximize, and so forth. Reshape it, change the colors, those types of things, and that app operates just as if it were installed locally, and the user's, in theory, none the wiser. So it's a very effective use case that a lot of customers use to this day.
Now, in addition to that, if you go back to my story around how I got into the desktop virtualization world and taking that app, Windows Explorer, and putting a switch on it, there's nothing in that world of Citrix virtual app, that evolved from WinFrame and others that won't allow you to do a desktop. Right? If you want to do a
Right.
server multi-user desktop, you can do it just using Citrix virtual app licensing.
Yes, a lot of folks, would call that, terminal services desktops. But the term that we hear most often used, and the one that's really more correct, is session host based or session based desktops, where you can run multiple instances of the desktop on a single physical server running, 2016 or 2019 server. So you're virtualizing, or you're carving up that server into sessions. And each of those sessions can be a desktop. Some of those sessions could be apps. You can have a mix. Typically, we architect them in a special way when you're mixing apps and desktops, but nevertheless, the concept remains the same.
Yeah, and this virtual app model, it can be done certainly concurrent based. Can it also be done user device? I don't remember.
I believe so. Yes.
Okay. I know it can be concurrent, which is valuable. And then, like we
Yes.
said with the other product, it's also cloud friendly. It's not cloud native, but it's cloud friendly. So if you wanted to lift and shift or just reproduce your environment in the cloud, in a cloud, a public infrastructure as a service cloud like Azure, AWS, you could certainly do that. And there would be nothing wrong with doing that. It just wasn't built from day one to integrate clouds, but it certainly can and does have technology in it to make calls out to cloud APIs.
Right. Exactly.
So as we continue up that stack, the next product is Citrix Virtual App and Desktop. And what this one gets you is the best of both worlds, plus one more two more little known technologies. And that is the ability to do the app from a server OS, to do the desktop from a multi-user server OS. It's the ability to do a true VDI, so a connection to a single user Windows 10 session as well as the server desktop. And it also has two other not commonly talked about use cases, which I happen to like a lot. One of which is the ability to publish the application from a client OS called a VM hosted app. And what this does allows you to take an app that wasn't written for a server OS or needs to be run single user at a time and present that seamlessly to the end user. So it's probably not the lead use case for apps, but it's a fallback method in case you have an app that just doesn't play well in a multi-user server environment.
Yeah, that was designed for those apps that just simply needed to run on Windows 7 or now Windows 10. They just wouldn't behave properly, like you said, on 2016 or 2012 R2 or 2008 R2. That VM hosted apps. I mean, the downside of that is it's a great solution. Is that you had to stand up an individual VM for each instance of that application. It wasn't a multi-user aware, but we could talk about how that's changing as well later on.
Yeah, no, we definitely will.
Yeah.
The other use case, and I love this use case. I was a big proponent of it, but now I've got customers that are addicted to it, and that is the remote PC, where instead of connecting yourself to a individual virtual machine over virtualization presentation, now you're connecting people to a physical machine over virtualization presentation. And that's really intended to be a short-term solution. It's really intended for maybe administrators that need to get high fidelity use back into their desktop. But now I've got 3 or 4 clients that I've exposed this to, and they've built up a bunch of users that are using it. And now I'm going back and saying, okay, that was supposed to be short-term. Now you're supposed to have those users connecting to a virtual desktop, even from their cubicle or desk. But now they love their physical PC and remote access to it.
Yeah, I had in the past, I've had customers that did just what you said, and initially it was just a remote access play for administrators or something along those lines, and then it grew and grew until they had these huge, if you will, huge rooms with desktops that users connected to, and we're talking to them about, that really doesn't make sense. You should be virtualizing those desktops. You don't need all those machines. But the most interesting one I found was a manufacturing company who had given all of their users laptops as their quote unquote DR solution. So their presumption was that the users would take the laptops home with them every night. And that way, if something happened to the corporate office, they'd have the data on their laptops and they'd have access and so forth. What they found was as they wandered around the building after hours, the laptops were sitting on the desk still plugged in. So they went to a remote PC model and eventually evolved into a virtual desktop model that made a whole lot more sense for DR.
Yeah, I've seen a one-page written DR business continuity plan that said we're going to give everybody laptops. They're going to take them home every night. That was 10 plus years ago, and I couldn't even believe 10 years ago somebody managed to write that down and believe in it.
Yeah, this was probably about 5 or 6 years ago, and the thing that cracked me up was when they said we wandered around here one evening during the week, like at 7, 8 o'clock at night, and they were about 90% of the machines were still in the building. Wow. So their DR solution was pretty much pointless. So they ended up evolving to remote PC, but they used it as a stopgap, which is kind of what you were alluding to earlier, and eventually went to a full VDI model that really just made a lot more sense.
Well, the other use case, which is probably even less common now, is if you have a high-end power user that needs a true dedicated machine with all the horsepower, maybe even something like a moonshot type of scenario, HP moonshot, but definitely not what most people should be doing in the world of desktop virtualization.
No.
Okay, so that kind of tells the story around Citrix Virtual App and Desktop. Again, very cloud friendly. You can move this stuff to the cloud for sure. And then in addition to that, in the on-prem solution, we have the workspace and the workspace bundle, and that's the ability to take the things Citrix is doing around content collaboration, aka ShareFile, Zen Mobile. Both of those things are cloud now anyway. And then bundle that together with the virtual app and desktop, and maybe bring in some gateways and Citrix ADCs. But that's the kind of the bundling of all the things Citrix does. It includes the virtual app and desktop story we've been talking about.
Yes, the whole workspace concept. Typically when you see the word workspace in it, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Andy, but if you see workspace in it, it usually means it's on. It usually means it's in the cloud, or they're on-prem workspace offerings now too, or still.
Well, no, still, right? So the key word, and we're going to get to this in a minute. The key word is when you see service at the end of it.
Yeah, that's right.
That becomes interchangeable with cloud, but we're going to get to that in a second.
Yeah, even I struggle with that sometimes. Reviewing SOWs and things like that, I look at them and I'm like, is this on premises or cloud? And you have to really parse it out to make sure you understand it. If it says, service, like you said, it's usually cloud.
Yeah, and that's why we're doing this podcast, right? Because we
get
confused, and if it's service, but if it's not service, then it's an on-prem solution, which, as we've alluded to several times here, that doesn't mean it can't go in the cloud. It just doesn't come as a service in the cloud. It very much can be cloud friendly.
Yes.
So financially, right? All those solutions, everything from the virtual desktop standard CCU or user-based license, all the way up to the workspace and workspace bundled license. As you go through those progressions, it becomes more valuable and more expensive, but more value for sure, bringing all those technologies together. And then we move into this world of as a service. And so what as a service means, and you can insert the word cloud if you want, or you can leave the word cloud out. Some people have an affection towards cloud and some people don't. But as we start talking about as a service from Citrix, it means the control planes for these solutions, specifically the virtual app and desktop solutions, become something that Citrix hosts for you and makes available to you through some type of connection mechanism. But that again starts with the world of just simple VDI. So the Citrix Virtual Desktop service is back to that standard service, which allows a lot of people to accomplish what they need to, which is just a desktop virtualization strategy.
Right. Yep. Just the desktop in the cloud, or actually the infrastructure in the cloud. The desktop could be anywhere.
That's right. It could be back on-prem. It could be, in another cloud. It could be in 5 different clouds. I was listening to a Windows podcast earlier talking about some of the things the government's doing, and the guy he said what I love to hear people say, which you shouldn't have a cloud strategy. You should have a clouds strategy.
Right.
Which is easier said than done, but easier than ever compared to what it used to be. So, that low cost, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast, because I've had a lot of conversations the last week or two around, Citrix being way too expensive. And that's just not the case. I mean, if you are just looking for certain aspects, or if you know that to get the ball going, you need certain aspects of something as simple as VDI, Citrix has that solution, and you can very much get into that solution and make some headway and solve challenges for your company just with the Citrix Virtual Desktop standard solution.
Yeah, we have a number of customers that are able to do that. Just that's really all they need. So buy what fits your need.
Well, to be clear, and yes, buy what fits your need today, but know that the
Today.
services are there to extend beyond that. And Citrix is
Right.
doing a great job of building that roadmap to the future. And as you understand that SaaS apps outside of the desktop and other apps need to become part of what you offer to your end user, then it's, especially as a service, it's easy just to flip the switches and make that able.
Yep, and you can move up as you need to as things evolve in your business.
Or at the same time, if you know those things are coming in your business, then you start off
Yeah,
at
right.
the other end of the spectrum. Okay,
Right.
so let's go through these in progression. None of these have a concurrent offering. It's all user
Right.
based. Now, I like to be clear with people. It's not a named user base, even though it does become named, but it does at some point that user license gets back into the pool if the user doesn't use it in a timely enough fashion. I want to say it's 90 days. It might be 60 days, but it's not that you're dedicating a license to a user. It's just dedicated to them for a period of time.
Yeah, I think it's 90 days, but you're absolutely right. Is that it goes back into the pool if it goes unused for a certain period of time, or the employee leaves the organization, or things along those nature.
Now, before we move off the standard or the Citrix Virtual Desktop Service, I do want to
Right.
point something out. A lot of people are really excited around Microsoft WVD, Windows Virtual Desktop, which is part of their entitlements as an M3 client or M365 customer of Microsoft. The standard, the service, the Virtual Desktop Service, very much works with that. However, the entitlement of using a multi-user Windows 10, which Microsoft is now enabled, is not part of the Citrix Virtual Desktop Service. You have to move to one of the other solutions for that. The next thing up in the stack is the Citrix Virtual App Service, which allows you to connect to server-based entities like apps that we publish seamlessly, or even the desktop. So Citrix Virtual App Service will allow you to do Windows 2019 server desktops, if that makes sense.
Right.
And the key here is that that virtual delivery agent within the operating system is meant for a server-based multi-user session. So as we continue through that progression, the next thing in that order is the Citrix Virtual App and Desktop Service, which goes back to what we talked about a while ago with the ability to connect to server-based apps, server-based desktops, client-based apps, and client-based desktops, as well as I think remote PCs included, because you also have the virtual delivery agent for the server OS. Now we can connect to the multi-session Windows 10 Azure, as well as single session. So it kind of gets all the check boxes there.
Yeah, I didn't realize the Windows Virtual 10. The Windows 10 Azure multi-session was part of that. That's news to me.
Well, the key is the virtual delivery agent
Yeah, the
for
VDA.
the multi-user OS is really the key to that.
Yeah.
It's not so much based on the client. I mean, as you know, the kernel
Yeah.
is very similar. The operating system is very similar. It's just some of the other pieces of it make it different. But it's really the VDA that matters.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that walks you through, and again, as you go from the virtual desktop virtual desktop service up through the virtual app and desktop service, all user based, it becomes more and more expensive, but you get more value at the same time. And then finally, if we end up at the Citrix cream of the crop, we're sitting there at the Citrix Workspace service, which the term workspace, which you highlighted a minute ago, but as a service means that everything is part of a service. So you got your virtual app and desktop as a service. You've got your Zen Mobile or Citrix device management as a service. This is what we would call that now. You have content collaboration. And then, of course, I should bring back the fact that now we have the Citrix hypervisor, which is part of all of these things and an entitlement of having all of these licenses, including the on-prem traditional licenses.
Yeah, and it also the workspace service, I believe standard. I maybe misspeak here because I'm not as familiar with you, Andy, as in terms of what comes with each edition. But what we used to call the device management or Zen Mobile is endpoint management now, and that's delivered as a service. And There's also the gateway service, which enables users to connect through the cloud-hosted NetScaler gateway, as it were, that simplifies the architecture. And then there was one other thing that the other thing is analytics, the ability to have visibility into all of this stuff in a centralized way is also a part of this, at least at some level.
Yeah, we should, while we've got people listening, we should probably walk through real quick the differences, right? So we've got the workspace standard service, which is the ability to SaaS apps. We have the premium service, which brings in the virtual app and desktop, I believe. Let me double check that. And then we have the Workspace Premium Plus, which is going to bring everything together. So I'm going to pull up a slide here, but the ability to do everything as a service in the Citrix bucket would be certainly the Workspace Premium Plus offering.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think Premium is where you get the bulk of it, except for it's kind of like they've done. If you start with the Premium, it looks like the CVAD, Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops, and Hypervisor becomes a part of it when you go to Premium Plus. But most of the other offerings, like endpoint management and analytics and content collaboration, come in the Premium SKU. If I'm reading this right.
No, they definitely do.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? I think it's the Premium is the content collaboration and the device management piece. And then if you want the virtual app and desktop, which is kind of the roots of this whole conversation we've had here, then you're Premium Plus.
Right. And that's pretty much giving you everything: analytics, endpoint management, content collaboration, and so forth, and virtual apps and desktops, of course. So you're getting, and as well as, I believe, that also gives you the gateway service.
Actually, I think the gateway service to some degree, because of the analytics piece that comes along with this, I think it's part of all the different workspace options.
Yep, it is. You're right.
So, Bill, hopefully that was helpful for people. It helps me every once in a while just to talk through it. And I'm sure there's pieces that we left out that we can certainly come back and clean up later. But, going from WinView and the idea that Ed Yakabuchi had back in the day that, you could turn Windows or some type of client operating system into a mainframe with high fidelity, good user experience, has come a long way. And now we're to the point where we're doing it, and we're doing it as a service. And, if you're a Citrix customer and you need an entry-level product that helps you accomplish what your goals are today, and if you are looking for a solution that later brings in, the things like SaaS, the things like content collaboration, but still has the virtual app and virtual desktop piece of it that we're all going to be using for a bunch of years, includes the analytics piece. And then I guess we would be remiss if we didn't bring up where Citrix is really taking this whole stack to, which is the intelligence piece. So Citrix Workspace offerings with intelligence, where you can actually get kind of a personal assistant as part of all this, that when you land on that home screen, that workspace screen, you're getting input and insight from bots and things that are telling you, hey, this is what I think you need to be doing today, and making sure that you have that in your visibility.
Yeah, and we kind of talked about the workspace in a prior podcast, and how that has evolved to be what it is today, which is that desktop plane, or that workspace plane that contains everything in it, in the sense that you've got not just access to Citrix virtual apps and desktops, but also your SaaS and web-based apps, and with integrated single sign-on and high fidelity watermarking. And so there's a whole lot more to the workspace than just the aggregation of virtual apps and desktops and endpoint management and content collaboration. Those are solid products in and of themselves, but the ability to also layer in the SaaS and web apps that a lot of customers are using today, and enable that to be done so with some level of intelligence, and the bots you spoke of, is really a light years of evolution from where we were back in the 80s when this started.
I think that's the key thing, right? It's an evolution of where we were and what mattered then to where we are and what matters today. And in some cases, what matters today is the same thing that mattered then. And in some cases, what matters today is a massive evolution of where we were at. Mm-hmm. And I think the nice thing about the Citrix product set is it has all those, and they're all, to some degree, especially the older stuff, super mature, and they're leading the way with the newer stuff at the same time. I was in a meeting earlier today, and there's a lot of other players in the space that are trying to tackle the virtual app and desktop as a service specifically, and they've got a lot of things they've got to overcome around the architecture as well as the presentation protocol. I like to call those scars on your knuckles, right? I've worked on a lot of stuff, and I can fix about anything the third or fourth time, but the first couple times it's a lot of learning curve that has to go on.
That's right, and that's what these startups are having to deal with.
Yeah. All right, sir. Well, I appreciate you jumping on with this. It's something I've wanted to do for a while. We just kind of got lucky, and the other podcast didn't happen, so we had a chance to do this one, and we'll have this out of the way, and maybe a month from now or 5 years from now, we'll revisit it and find out where we've gone.
That's right. That'd be great.
Good news about our space. It never ends. It's going to just keep going until I don't work anymore. That's for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, Bill, any parting shots? I mean, where can people find Bill Sutton?
They can find Bill Sutton on Twitter at bsutton2009. Not very original, not as original as yours, but one of these days I'll come up with a moniker and I'll change it. But right now it's at bsutton2009. That's BSUTTON 2009.
All right. Well, great. And I think we'd be remiss if I didn't bring up that if you do a project with XenTegra, they're going to work. Bill's going to be leading to some degree that project and have a lot of insight. So certainly some value in that from a XenTegra customer perspective.
Yeah.
And then for me, right? So I got a lot of topics I like to make sure I cover in some of these podcasts, but I want to make sure people know about Synergy and that you're going to Synergy. If you're not, please reach out. Let's figure out a way to get you there. We've got our events that Pete Downing does a tremendous job leading. If you need more about that, go to XenTegra.com/events. But we do a lot of free trainings where things like we're talking about here get fleshed out in much more detail, and they're open to anyone. I mean, we even let other partners, other competitors attend these things. It's not something we try to hide. We try to lead through education, and that's education for all.
Yep, this is one of the things that led me to you guys, as you know, Andy.
Yeah, so we're proud to do it and want to do more of it. We'll keep coming up with ways. But
it's good stuff.
All right, guys. Well, with that, we'll wrap it up. And thank you for listening to another session of the Citrix session. Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
Bye, Bill.